Hi, I'm Susanna. Thank you so much for checking out the unedited version of Daniel Roby in Austin Street Shelter. Daniel was my third interview, which we did over Riverside, which I really mostly like, but my computer doesn't like Riverside, so I have to use my other computer, which causes me some problems. But in general, it's a good platform. Anyway, Daniel is amazing. I hope you enjoy this. Please leave us any comments at gibagencydallas.com. And thanks so much. So, okay, thanks again for watching to the end. And no, I haven't come up with my Marvel cool ending because as you'll notice, I'm in the same outfit. It is the same day. And so, yeah, there you go. I'm on it though. Today, I have Daniel Roby. He has tirelessly worked as the CEO of Austin Street Shelter since 2015. And in 2018, Dallas Business Journal selected him as one of their top 40 under 40. And under their leadership, they have doubled their case management. And in June of this year, they opened their new facility to serve even more clients. So in 2021, you served 1,489 clients. What's 2022 looking like so far?
So we've already surpassed that number for sure. We're at about the 1,600 mark, and we still have, a number of months to get to the rest of the year. So, there's a lot of people who need help right now. There's a lot of people who are making phone calls to get help, a lot more doing that, more people showing up at the shelter. So I go through some more stats later, but we're at a unique point in time in Dallas with homelessness and what direction it ends up taking. So,
it's interesting. As I was driving today, I was going to ask you because it seems like I couldn't tell if there were more tent cities popping up or they're just being moved from the old places where they have put up the chain link fences.
Yep.
Or is it really more?
It's yes and yes. There's about a third of the population of people who are homeless, and this is pretty national, is unsheltered. That's also true locally, like here in Dallas. So our point in time counts have us somewhere in the ballpark of 1,500 people who are unsheltered at a point in time. And those are just the folks that we happen to see outside. It doesn't include everyone in an abandoned car that we can't find or in a building that we can't find or whatever. So with that 1,500 or so, we have a total of 4,500 that are homeless on that same night. So, it's about a third, but it can ebb and flow a little bit.
Yeah. So you always have good stories. Will you tell me one of your client stories?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of, what would be a good one. I have a few people that have gotten especially, close to my heart. A few people where those stories go really well. And you think about the enormous ways that people have shown courage and just a unique confidence to change their own circumstances. And other ones where it's still really sad and still really a struggle. But those people are equally deserving of value and dignity and investment, regardless of the outcome that they've been able to manage for themselves. So I got one I'm thinking about is a guy who it started painfully and ended up wonderfully. A guy who we had Winter Storm Uri. I think everyone remembers like the entire electric grid in Texas just completely shut down. The city was essentially frozen over. It was interesting because we kind of always expected like some big monumental, some state, federal, or at least local government to kind of step up and say, we're going to take, this on and deal with this horrible circumstance. But really, as providers, we were talking to ourselves and we're like, there's nothing. I mean, there's just us. What are we going to do about this? And so we ended up operating a number of different new locations, hotels and, convention centers and whatnot during that time. But there's one individual who was staying on a front porch during that season. He got really bad frostbite. He was probably about 20 years old, still pretty young. And he ended up in the hospital with his frostbite and he lost both of his legs.
Oh, no.
And so he was outside and that's just a heater ended up falling on his legs when he was asleep and he had frostbite. So he didn't realize it got infected. It was the whole thing. So fast forward a little bit, though. This individual shows up at our shelter, and after the amputation, gets enrolled in our medical respite program. Well, medical respite's like this new partnership that we're super excited about, because we always feel like, hey, we're good at doing what we do, like emergency shelter, right? Food, clothing, housing support, all that. But there's all kinds of stuff that we don't do. I'm not a doctor. I don't staff a hospital. I can't, there's a certain limit to our capabilities. So I'm always trying to figure out, how do we get those folks connected to us? And Texas Health Resources, Dallas, the Presbyterian shelter on Walnut Hill, had really linked arms with us and said, hey, we'd like to be partners with you guys for folks who are leaving the hospital. So we have this project together. We've got nursing on staff. We've got a doctor that comes by once a week. We have a community healthcare worker that supports it as well. And, so he joined the medical respite program. But what was cool about that is, without any, financial resources, he doesn't know anybody. He's new to homelessness in general. Not new to struggle, but new to homelessness. We were able to get him fitted with prosthetic legs during that time. He learned to walk, navigating the shelter at Austin Street, learned to walk again, and eventually was able to move into his own place, and with some support from case management staff, got employed, and essentially he's back on his feet. He's living a productive, healthy life that can impact others. And that wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for so many people, right? The people that stepped up to support us, financially for the program, the hospitals saying, hey, we're willing to do this with you. His own courage and willingness to be able to say, hey, I need help. And, I cannot tell you, extraordinary human being, in his joy and confidence. Mm-hmm. So I'm telling you what I consider to be a sad story, but if you would have seen him, he was like the happiest guy in the shelter. And I don't know what it is about him that gave him that sense of confidence and joy. He had his hard moments, but anyway, I'm super impressed by him. I'm like, I don't know that I would have had the courage to go through what he has, with his sense of determination and confidence.
Wow, that is good. What's a typical day look like for you in the shelter? Because they're not there 24 hours, right? You get a new batch of people.
Yeah. So, we've gone through this shift during COVID where we've always been what's called a night by night shelter, just meaning that people come in every night and they leave in the morning, and then we clean the place and kind of go through the same process again in the afternoon. COVID kind of hit this shock to us because the county health department was like, listen, the differences in people that you're getting on a night by night basis, you're going to cause, potential, a spread or infection issue. So they said, hey, at least during this COVID pandemic, you need to lock down and just serve the same people. So we did that. Well, when we moved to our new building, we were able to expand capacity, both case management services, number of shelter beds we provided, all that. So we moved to what's called the entry exit shelter, which means once you come to Austin Street, you're ours until we find you a place.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
It allows for a sense of stability, because usually people they're trying to navigate a lot, right? They're in the midst of their housing crisis for sure. Usually that also means financial crisis and relational crisis, and sometimes mental health crisis or addiction crisis. So as you're managing all that, it's good to have a little bit of sense of stability. So,
do you feel like that's helped you get people placed because you have them for longer?
Yeah, no, I do think that's true. I think, sure, I could probably count, during our peak prior to COVID, we probably served more individuals than we probably will this in 2021 we would have. 2019 or 2018, our numbers may have been higher, but our outcomes wouldn't have been. When I say that, is it's what is the goal you're trying to serve? Certainly it's to provide safe shelter, basic needs, food, clothing, all that. But isn't it really more than that? Isn't it really that we provide hope that something different is possible for people, and that we actually take them all the way through the journey so that they get to turn that key and open that door to their own place and say, this is mine now.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's the ultimate goal, well, I think what we do now is much more effective.
Oh, that's exciting. Good for you guys.
Mm-hmm.
That's good. What's a good day look like for you?
Mm.
When you come home and you're like, family at dinner, I had a really good day. What's that day look like?
Man, you're bringing a smile to my face, because that family dinner time is like one of my favorites. We have this family like tradition every night where we say like who won the best day contest. So it is something I inherited from my family growing up, which is we all compete for who had the best day, regardless of how good or poorly the day went. Right? You should tell your best story and talk about the positive. And so, at the end of every day, usually my beginning day, I'm like packed with the administration. How are we dealing with, budgets? What are the operational problems? Staffing? How are we doing all this different stuff? But the last hour of my day is like my favorite, because that's when I go in the shelter and I just spend time with people and hearing their stories and hopefully providing some kind of encouragement. If there's an issue, do what I can to resolve it. Today was actually especially fun. Yeah, you'll get a kick out of this. So I was wondering, how do we increase like a sense of positivity? Because it's a depressing circumstance to be in. So some of us do random stuff. Today, I blew up this massive beach ball, right? And so I go into the shelter and I just yell, like I said, hey guys, and I just hit the beach ball out, at this like crowd of people. And people just start, one guy knocks it this way and someone else knocks it the other way. And people immediately just think, oh, let's just keep it in the air, right? And you see smiles on people's faces and they're laughing. And it's like that brief moment of like, hey, at the end of the day, we're all human beings and we all want a sense of like joy and fun in the midst of whether it's, your work or whether your work is to try to get out of your circumstance. So that was fun today.
All right, we're going to flip the script, because what's a bad day look like for you? Because I think if you played the same game of what a bad day looks like, you might be able to win that one occasionally as well, with just the nature of what you are doing for people. It's not all roses.
You're going to make me sad, because for me, the bad day, and we could go into this psychologically, but is when I feel like I wasn't enough today.
Yeah,
I didn't have enough. We couldn't give enough. There are too many holes in the bottom of the buckets of too many people, that no matter how much water we try to give out, whether it's of ourselves or in the community, it's like it didn't cut it today. And I can think of times that have been like that, when people that we've known and loved have lost their lives, lost their loved ones, fallen through the cracks, made mistakes. It's hard to be like, at the end of the day today, I had to decide between an 80-year-old man going through cancer treatment who's disabled in a wheelchair and a 35-year-old mom who's going to work and trying to get her kids back from the state. And I could only give a bed to one of them. Like that sense of not enough is really not fun. It's hard.
No. How do you, so I was looking at some statistics of this, because social, and I don't know your specific, I'm going to go generic. Social work burnout rates are 39% and a lifetime burnout rate of 75%.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something you guys talk about, like with your staff? I mean, how do you manage that? Is it part of the discussion with what you do?
It's something that we've worked hard at, and frankly, we need to do a lot more for. It's hard because you feel like, well, no matter how much we do, it's difficult to sustain. There's a statistic I saw recently, and I don't mean this to compare, because police officers have incredibly difficult jobs. But there was a study on, I think it was self-report, so it was probably underutilized from the police and fire, side of things, but there's things, emergency shelter frontline staff members, have more incidences of post-traumatic stress disorder from their work experience than police officers in the fire department, who have dedicated lines and resources. Now, I'm not at all saying that that's adequate. I think we need to do a lot more for our police officers, so we deal with a lot of the same population. But that's just to show that, like, I think emergency shelter workers are kind of forgotten in that whole first responder group of people, and that it's a group that goes through just as much and sees traumatic circumstances. There was some, this isn't our agency, but another agency in town, and literally this week, they were in a homeless encampment and found somebody who was not alive. And so that shocking experience and how you deal with discovering that somebody has died outside and what that does to you psychologically, is intense. And it wasn't the first time this group had seen that. And unfortunately, it probably won't be the last.
How do you keep from, like, you've got this extreme need of your clients, and like the example you used earlier, you can help the 80-year-old man, you can help the 35-year-old mom, and you have to do your job and be empathetic and not become calloused at the same time. Like, you got to wear an armor of protection and yet be open at the same time. How does that?
I mean, that's the work, right? And that is the job. I mean, like, everything else about it is something that, I check email, and everyone else I know that goes to work checks email, right? I go to meetings, everyone else I know goes to meetings. But that's the thing that's unique about our world, is to be able to hold those things in balance. I think Brene Brown actually says this. I think she says, like, strong backs off front. It's the same thing, that we have to be super consistent and structured in what we do, because when your whole world is chaos, you need to be able to walk into a place that's like, no, I got you. Like, just, trust us, and we're going to make sure you get taken care of. On the flip side of that, you also have to be empathetic and make sure you take each person's individual circumstance into consideration, because everyone is so different from each other. So that kind of tension of, like, individualized care versus, like, kind of community safety and structure is a constant tension. And we go through things programmatically on a regular basis to revisit those. So, like, every single month I have a town hall with clients that says, tell me everything you're frustrated or upset about, and let's work on it. Every single week we have a group of people that's a committee that evaluates people's, whether it's a concern they've brought up or whether it's a decision that said, hey, this person's no longer safe in our environment. They need to be elsewhere. So those decisions aren't made unilaterally. They're not made by one person, because it's not right that another human being gets to decide whether or not you are safe and whether your basic needs are met, food, clothing, shelter. I shouldn't be deciding that for somebody else, right? You shouldn't be deciding that for another human. That's really more power than I feel like God intended us to have, to be able to make that decision for other people. But that's where we are, right? So we have to figure out, how are we going to work together? So I have a security officer who's focused on safety, meeting with an operational staff member, meeting with the client's advocate. So the person who's responsible for advocating for them. And so we make sure that all those voices are heard before we make any decision about somebody, whether that's something we can improve or whether it's, hey, this isn't the right place for you.
Gotcha. So I'm gonna dip a little bit, and we're gonna go talk about, because we're gonna talk about two things you're not supposed to talk about. Okay. I want to talk about religion, and then I want to talk about politics.
Okay, great, awesome. I'm
you
game.
Tell me if I've crossed a line.
No, I have no lines.
I saw a post that you made. It was recently, and it was a passage that was resonating with you. I don't remember the passage. It's not on my questions, but you said something, you mentioned God, and I was like, oh, I want to ask him about that, because it seemed like from your post, your faith is a really big part of your everyday life and what you do. And because I was like, how does he manage to balance everything? And I kind of think that's probably where it's at, isn't it?
Well, I think for me, so when I first got a chance to meet with the board and talk about this role, I just laid it out for them. I was like, hey, I have to do this as a part of my faith. So if you need something that's devoid of faith, like, I'm not your guy. Like, we can't go down this journey together. It's like an ultimatum for me. And that doesn't mean that we have to be in a situation where, faith is something that is mandated upon somebody else. But I do think people who are going through the experience of homelessness are looking for hope, and they're looking for a message of inspiration, and everyone's journey is different. But we have to make room for that. I think if we remove faith from the conversation, then you're removing people from their opportunity to be able to have hope.
Personally, I would rather talk about religion any day than politics. I find it so fascinating, as long as, we can find that middle ground of allowing multiple beliefs. But because I know you were appointed by, you mentioned town hall, and I know that you were appointed to a different position in social work by Mayor Rawlings. How much do you have to deal with Dallas city politics?
I mean, I engage with government officials every single day. So there's never a time when I'm not talking with somebody. I try not to get too into the politics of an individual. So whether or not this person wins or that person wins. I mean, I've got my personal preferences. You may drive by my house and see somebody signed in my yard. For me, we really have to, what I miss in politics in general is we've gotten, and you're going to hear my politics now, we've gotten super into the fringes, right? So social media, the way the news is done now, more for entertainment than it is for, just facts. What ends up happening is we've got these polar extremes. And I think in my work, we get super practical. Like it is all about getting stuff done, because if you don't, somebody may die, and so with that in mind, and it's so hard sometimes to get stuff done, that, I feel like we have to have everyone in the conversation to move the ball forward. So, I tend to be a little bit of a centrist in that regard, because I think that's the only place where you can get people from both sides. So, although, I mean, you'll hear me advocate. I mean, I've got Laura and Barbara Bush are my speakers for our next luncheon, and you'll find me in the most liberal side of the party, advocating for social justice and the rights of, whether it's payer source discrimination or minimum wage, or so I'm in every world, and that's just a part of my life. So.
Do you feel like, depending on, does the money that you get from Dallas shift based on who's in power?
Not based on who's in power. I would say, one, we don't really get money from the city. There was a project that we had for a while that the city was supporting, that was a transportation project. That was an idea that I had that seemed to gain a lot of traction. We needed a funder, and the city had additional funds because I think other agencies were struggling to spend the funds that were allocated, because there are a lot of requirements on how you spend those funds. So we kind of inherited the leftovers, essentially, to be able to pilot this program and show that it works. But everything else that we get that goes through the city is really maybe state funds or maybe federal funds that go through the city, but it's not actually from the city budget, right? It's not coming out of the sales tax from Dallas or something like that.
That seems, is that normal? That the city, it's like the homelessness problem is here in Dallas. Why is Dallas not contributing to the fix? Yeah,
I think Dallas has historically taken we want to be, low tax environment, and there's usually been so much kind of underfunding of things like the police and things like that. Those are things that tend to hit you kind of no matter where you are. Like if you if you've got a pothole in your, neighborhood, you're aware of that pothole in your neighborhood. The issue with homelessness is it impacts everybody, but we just don't realize it. And so when we do things like have certain areas of town where most services are, that can be beneficial in some ways for collaboration, but it can be real problematic with living under the assumption that you think that people are coming from the same place, because they are all coming from like the Metroplex, but from all over.
How do we compare as far as how we deal with homelessness than other cities? Like if you had to give Dallas a grade or a ranking, how are we doing?
Well, we do it very differently than other cities do.
Interesting.
The homeless populations can be different based upon a city and state. So I used to do some homeless services on the West Coast in Portland, Oregon, and that population is different from the population of Dallas. The response is also very different. So I can say like Dallas is super rare that we have large emergency shelters like Austin Street. They don't exist in other cities. It's super rare to be able to find a shelter that has 200, 300, 400, 500 people in it. That doesn't exist. That's a great resource. It's also something you have to be cautious of, because the goal is not to shelter people, right? It's to get them to their own place. And so other cities have invested more on things like permanent supportive housing, and Dallas right now needs to catch up to where they are. So that's one thing that Dallas is working on. Rapid rehousing is a rental assistance is something else that Dallas has recently gotten super involved with, but hasn't historically been. So there's actually been 580 people in this most recent program that the mayor helped to sponsor, called the Dallas Real-Time Rapid Rehousing Program, that was in partnership with the county and several other cities and neighboring areas. And that was a $72 million project, and it's been very successful. I mean, we've got, like I said, about 600 people off the streets and into a home, and got another 400 that are kind of queued up and are just trying to find a place that will accept their subsidy.
You talked about permanent supportive housing. Would that be a city project?
It could be, and it should be. A permanent supportive housing project basically means, it's a place to live with support. So you've got an assigned case manager, and it doesn't have like an end date. Like you're not like on you've got 6 months and then you need to be done. It's really for people who have disabilities. So it's not intended for people who are employable and can just go out and get a job. It's for people who are like, hey, these people are going to need help for a while. And if you've got a situation where someone has a mental illness, they're handicapped, confined to a wheelchair, right? They have a developmental disability, and we have people who have all three of those things. That's going to be very difficult for them to be able to get a living wage, that they're actually able to pay rent with. Because I'm not talking about minimum wage. I'm talking about somebody who, living wage based on MIT is almost $18 an hour in Dallas right now. And so that's not every job.
How much has the housing, the increased cost of housing affected? I mean, could you talk about $18 an hour? Can you live on $18 an hour? Or that's what it takes to live here now? That's
what it takes to live in Dallas. Okay. To get a one bedroom, it takes $18 an hour. We are Dallas. I mentioned that we're in this like pivoting like place in time, and the reason for that is because Dallas historically, will grow out, right? We build out Frisco and McKinney and Prosper. We just keep building, Wiley,
Melissa,
Saxon. Just keep going. We've gotten to a point where enough companies are moving here, enough people are moving here for various reasons. We've seen a 22% increase since the pandemic in March of 2020. That is not sustainable. So we were looking at units that we would help provide subsidy for that were like $800 a pop. Now I can't find anything less than $1,200, anything, anywhere. And then I got to find someone who also may accept someone who has a criminal background. We have more calls in the past couple of weeks than we've ever had for people who call in for help. When we opened up our shelter that had 100 additional beds, they were filled, within a couple of days. Okay. So, I mean, I had 54 new people the very first day we opened. So there's clearly a demand here for the services we're providing.
You can go back to, we were talking about what a typical day looks like for you. Obviously, spending a lot of time in the admin side versus the actual people side.
Yeah.
How do you dealing with the political side of all of it, of managing homelessness? Like, you're not just managing the shelter. You're like, all right, we're dealing with the homelessness problem and the shelter. And then you're also like fundraising. I'm fascinated that the city, where does the money come from? If Dallas isn't giving it to you, you said the city, you said the state.
I mean, most of it's people writing $25. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but most people are writing checks for like $25, or $100 or whatever. And we just get enough people, to support you doing stuff like that. And of course, that's foundations as well. We have events every year. So October 14th is our big luncheon that we have coming up. North Texas Giving Day is huge for us. That's coming up here in like 2 days. So, all those things are really, they're not just critical. Like Austin Street didn't accept any government funds until like 5 or 6 years ago. And even then it was just a inheritance of another agency having trouble managing a grant. And we're like, well, we were told that if we didn't manage the program, the funds were going to go back to the state's general fund, which basically means it will go to no use. So we're like, we need so much help in homelessness. I can't let these funds just go away. And so that's what we did. And then it's kind of been over time, we've had more people the thing with government funds is sometimes they come to you. Like, they're like, we want this to be put to good use, right? Will you do it? And a lot of times you're trying to evaluate, well, with all the limitations on this, can we scale? And is the program actually set up right to be able to actually help people? Or are we going to be off, in left field, spinning our wheels, trying to make an impact and not being able to be productive? So.
Do you find, because I know a lot of the money to run the shelter comes from people giving money, but you also have a ton of people who come in to serve your clients. Mm-hmm. There's an argument. I've talked to a couple people, and there's an argument, and you look at like volunteerism, for example. Yeah. And they're like really down on volunteerism. They're like, no, don't go and spend your vacation. Just send your money.
Yeah.
How do you land, or do you have to navigate that argument?
I do. I think, frankly, a lot of it comes down to the way in which you approach volunteerism. And I mean that both the individual and the organization. Like, you always have to protect your mission. You have to protect your mission against well-intentioned individual donors that want to give to something specific. One time I had a guy that I told him no. Like, we desperately needed new beds, and he wanted to pay for all of them, and I was ecstatic, because to find somebody who will write a check for more than $100 is really tough. And we needed these, and I could expand capacity. Meaning I could go from cots at the time to bunk beds. So I was able to get more people inside, which was super important at that time. And but he sent me this email. It's like, this is the bed that I want you to purchase. And I'm like, yeah, it doesn't work that way. Like, I can't buy that bed because it's made out of wood, and we have a bed bug issue that if we have wood furniture, we're going to have bed bugs, and we're going to cause more trouble, and then more people won't come to the shelter because they're here that there are bed bugs, and then you have more people who are unsheltered. It just, it doesn't work. And he was like real firm, and I was like, okay, I get it. Like, I'm good though. Thanks. And it's the same thing with government, right? They want to say, hey, I want you to I've had sometimes those want me to spend all this money on housing, and that's needed in our community, but they won't fund like the social support services to go with the housing. So it's like, we want to pay for the rent, but we don't want to pay you to go check and make sure that they're okay. And I'm like, okay, well, I've been through this before, right? And I know how it works. And if you give someone a key and a door, it doesn't make it a home. You actually have to make it a home for someone. You have to help them rebuild their relationships. At Austin Street, we say financial need or poverty plus a crisis minus social support is what makes homelessness. So if you just solve the financial issue, you didn't solve the issue, right? If you just solve whatever the crisis is, you didn't solve the issue, right? You need the support of the community, right? You need to be able to manage the crisis that's in front of them, and need to ultimately address the math, which is, the cost of housing.
If you had a choice, say, let's just go with $100. If I said, hey, Daniel, I will either write you $100 check or I will come and serve dinner for, I don't know, a week, what would you pick?
That's tough. So the challenge with these difficult questions is I only know how to be honest. So in that circumstance,
I want you to give me a fake answer.
Yeah, I know. But yeah, so the answer to your question is in that circumstance, I'd say I'd like the $100.
Yeah.
Now, if you tell me I'll write you $100 or I will show up every week for 2 hours, I'll take every week for 2 hours over $100 every month or every week. So the challenges can be is like it is, and we tend to think of homelessness like, oh yeah, I mean, just serve, like anybody can do that. And a lot of times I have people who are interested in employment. They're like, hey, I don't need to make what I've been making at this, financial services firm, making, six, multiples of six figures. But I do need to make something. I'd like to pivot over there. I'm like, okay, great. Well, tell me what has been your experience with a homeless person before? And they're like, yeah, I've never talked to anybody before. I'm like, well, I mean, just like everything else, there's kind of there's like a learning curve, right? I mean, this is, I mean, I don't want to say it like it's an industry, but if you don't want someone who doesn't know what they're doing the wrong thing. So that's why I'm saying with volunteerism, like we need the community to come and serve meals. That's like super critical, but it's not impossible to pick up the phone and have somebody show up for dinner. Like that's really pretty easy. Like if I have 30 people that tomorrow say, we don't want to come anymore, I can easily find 30 more people to come and fill their spot.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what's hard though is I don't have hardly anyone serving breakfast. Why? Well, because you have to get up early. You have to come down to the shelter at like 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, and you have to go to work after. You're like, no, it's too complicated. It's too difficult, right? And I get it. Like I'm guilty of all the same human conditions that everybody else goes through. Believe it or not, there are occasions when I drive by somebody on the corner and I don't actually stop and help them. So, I get it, but it's part of it.
How do you help people that are on the corner?
Well, I'm kind of in a fortunate situation. So, I mean, I give them my business
Here's
card.
my card.
Yeah, I do because I'm like, and usually I go through the rigmarole with people. Like, they usually tell me their story and I ask them if they would ever go to a shelter. And then they sometimes will tell me something that's not true, which is like, they won't let me in, or I tried, that and, I can't bring in my belongings or they won't, I have to be drug free or it's $15 a night or whatever it may be. And I'm like, okay, well thanks for sharing that with me. So let me tell you about Austin Street and they've all, they're familiar. Right. So it's a little bit different conversation and I can also follow up to make sure that they get the help they need. So it's not fair. But what I used to do before I had this job is I would take people to lunch. And that was the most valuable. So you want to spend your time in a valuable way. Either go hang out on a street where people that are homeless are, or like take people to lunch. I know that's not safe for every person based upon your circumstance or whatever. But what's the most valuable thing we have? I mean, it's our time.
It's our time.
And so volunteering at a place like Austin Street or going to a place with the guy that's on the corner and saying, hey, let's sit down and share a meal together. You get a chance to hear that guy's story. And that's more valuable than anything because you take somebody to lunch, you'll get the real deal. They'll take off whatever it is that they hustle on the corner. They'll take off that, whatever it is they tell people, and you'll hear the truth. And some of those stories, man, they stick with you.
Do you have people who want to bring in their pets?
We don't not very often.
Interesting.
When I was in Portland, it was everywhere. So I used to live in Portland, Oregon. I did some homeless services up there and there were pets constantly. When we do, luckily we partner, and so the bridge has a great pet program. They have kennels. You can go there, walk your dog. You can, all kinds of stuff.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah. So
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So we'll work with them to be able to manage that if it's needed.
I did a video for the Housing Crisis Center, and it was down in the tent city underneath when it was like at Haskell and 30.
Mm-hmm.
And there were people there with dogs. And I always thought it was so interesting because, they had their little, everybody has their little place that they were living, but the dogs don't bark at you.
Mm.
And I was like, this is not the dogs. Like the dogs recognize it's not their place or something. They just watched me go by. So I admire all the work that you do. The work that you do is super important. You do it with grace, and you always seem to have a smile on your face when I see you. Is there anything else that you want to talk about that I didn't touch on?
I guess I do. I'm thinking about the question because I've never had someone ask me if you'll take $100 versus come and serve a meal before. And I think I want to change my answer.
Okay.
And the reason why I'm changing it is not because the $100 is easier to deploy for good, but you can't replace the experience of face-to-face contact with someone who's homeless. And my experience has been, if you don't come down to do the service, you won't do it. And if you do that, frankly, I'm like, you'll give $100 without even thinking about it. So you end up getting both anyway.
That was my debate, honestly, with that person, because they were like, actually, it was my brother. I'll go ahead and tell you. It was my brother, because he's in economic development at Park Cities in Salt Lake.
Yeah.
But we got on this discussion of voluntourism because he's got a master's in public MPA, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he loves coming up with and finding government money to fund and neighborhood development. But he was like, it's better to just send your money. But I was like, how can you take away from that experience? Like if I go, I then tell 5 people about this amazing experience I had, how I was changed, how I was moved. And he was talking really high level. Statistically speaking, it's better to give money. But how do you argue human experience and being with people and connecting? And
I know we're going over time, but I mean, we call Austin Street's new building Austin Street Center for Community Engagement because we philosophically don't believe that we want to be a mega institution, like a government agency that, solves the problem of homelessness in Dallas. We believe in the idea of like, hey, this takes everyone. We're all in this together. And historically that's worked in communities, right? I mean, it doesn't matter if you go back to the Great Depression, people would bring whatever vegetable from their garden and put it in a stew pot and serve that meal, in elementary school. So it's a continuation of that philosophy. And I think if you try to how many times have we tried we're just going to put enough money on this, right? And the government's going to solve it. I mean, that generally doesn't work, right? So, and part of it is even to get those government resources, how do you do it? Well, you do it by voting. And how do you get the votes? Well, people actually have to have context for what you're talking about. It's not, people don't vote just about whatever, statistic is in their mind. They vote with their heart and their emotions. You can't replace somebody who got to know someone else who's homeless, has heard their story and said, man, that's just not right. I don't care how you slice it. It's not right that somebody with a minor marijuana offense, it's the same. I've never smoked marijuana, but for somebody who's like, I did that when I was, a kid, and yet this person gets locked up for 20 years. Like, how is that fair?
Which is now legal in many states.
Right. So, and yet we have people in prison that's their story, and so, and it's that in 1,000 other circumstances. If I were to lose my income today, I would be okay, right? Because I'd call mom, dad, sister, brother, aunt, cousin. Somebody's going to take me in. And that's just not true for so many people. And so their outcome is different. And it's not because they're not as moral as other people. It's not because they're not as smart as other people or as hardworking as other people. Trust me, I've seen a guy with one leg mop the floor. So I know that people, can work hard. It's not about that. It is really about the circumstances that they have. I'm sure that they contributed in some way, but ultimately that's why I feel like it's better for us and for them, for us to be involved. Right. And I think we have to switch the mentality of giving that says, hey, I'm better than you and you need me. And so I'm going to do it this way. But if we can continue that engagement of community as a part of giving and encourage people to, yes, vote, yes, share on social media, yes, give, yes, volunteer, and then give them those experiences, I think they'll treat other people differently, and then you'll walk away different. So then we just helped two people, right? We helped you, who got to volunteer, and we got to help the person who's in need too.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being here and for your work.
Thanks again for watching to the end. And no, I haven't come up with my Marvel cool ending, because as you'll notice, I'm in the same outfit. It is the same day. And so, yeah, there you go. I'm on it though.